Today's video is all about sniper bullet velocities. So we've been kind of flying blind in terms of actual weapon statistics in this game so far. I wanted to get in there and actually test the bullet velocities for the sniper rifles, so all their barrels, all the muzzles, and all the ammunitions, just to try to give you guys some idea of what attachments you should be picking for sniper rifles. And it's probably somewhat comparable for the other weapons as well, but they don't always seem to match up. Even if two attachments have the same name, they don't have the same stats always in this game, so we'll have to wait for Sim to get all of their numbers out to have everything. But I just wanted to give some preemptive numbers for these snipers and get some pretty interesting results and some pretty interesting questions answered. So let's jump straight into it and start talking about bullet velocities. Like I said in the intro, the attachments don't always have the same stats, even if they have the same name. So for instance, like the Nil Sound 90 suppressor could have different stats on different sniper rifles, different ARs, things like that. So I had to test every single one of these individually. So let me show you guys exactly how I do that first. So I was able to grab an RTX 4090 when they came out. So that really helps me with this testing because I can actually now push 240 FPS locked as well as record at the same time through OBS with almost no frame drops. It's probably about 95%. But it makes my testing really, really accurate and much quicker than it used to be. For this kind of stuff. So how I test this, you can see the frame count in the bottom right. Basically I'll just play the video until I'm about to fire, and remember this is 240 FPS, so I'll wait for the weapon to fire. I measure exactly 200 meters to that target, so after it fires I can go frame by frame, look at that very first frame where it fires right here. So that's 25,104 is the frame count, and then just play the video, and then you'll see the bullet impact is always pretty clear. There's a puff of smoke right when it impacts, and this is really consistent. So right there, this frame right here is the first frame where it actually impacts the wall, because there's that big puff of smoke. So I know it's 200 meters, I know how many frames it took, and I know how much time each frame took in the real world. So from that I can just calculate meters per second directly. So I went through and did that individually for every single attachment that modifies bullet velocity for every sniper rifle. Didn't make any assumptions about them being the same between weapons or anything like that. So right off the bat we get the Signal 50 here. The fastest bullet velocity suppressor is the Bruin Counter Ops, and that came out at 29% increased bullet velocity. So one thing to note here, they're actually trying to model sort of semi-realistic ballistics. So I believe my numbers will always be a little bit, if it's a positive bullet velocity number, I think my percentages will always be a little bit lower than they actually are in the code, because the code is just modifying muzzle velocity, but the bullet slows down over time. And because air resistance is proportional to the square of velocity, I think the amount that a bullet that's going faster gets slowed down is going to be percentage-wise a little bit more than a bullet that's going a little bit slower. So if it's an increase, I think my increase will show a little bit less of an increase than what it actually is. So when it says 14%, I think it's probably 15%, 29 is probably 30, and so on. For barrels, 29-inch Kalo barrel was 20% increase in bullet velocity. Not much else to say there. It's the fastest bullet velocity. And then high velocity ammo is huge. So high velocity ammo on all the guns seems to do 45%. And that is a dramatic increase in bullet velocity for basically no penalty. I think that's probably one of the best attachments in the game, especially because it seems like bullet velocities in general are a little bit lower in this game. So high velocity is going to make it feel like you have much, much better hit reg. So I pretty much recommend that on almost every gun, even in a lot of cases the SMGs. On to the MCPR 300, we've got the FTAC Reaper, Bruin Agent 90, and Nil Sound 90 all did, it looks like, 30% increase in bullet velocity. So those are the three you want to look at there for bullet velocity. Minus 1%, obviously that's just testing error there, so that's just 0. Barrel wise, barrels don't do too much for the MCPR, but the 22-inch OMX increases by 12%. So if you're looking for absolute maximum increased bullet velocity, you're going to want that barrel. But a lot of the times, you saw in my Signal 50 build I didn't have a barrel on that, and that's because the bullet velocity gains from the barrel I'm not sure are worth like the ADS penalties all the time in certain cases. And this is one of those cases for me. Like 12% is not that much, and this is going to make the ADS times way, way slower. Again, high velocity is 25%, and then, or 45%, sorry. And then incendiary is actually very penalizing. So incendiary, just like it was in Warzone 1, minus 26%. So that's a really dramatic decrease in bullet velocity. And the same thing that I said for my numbers being a little bit low on the plus bullet velocity attachments. I think they'll be a little bit high on the minus bullet velocity attachments. So when it's minus 11, that's probably minus 10. When it's minus 26, that's probably minus 25%. Like I said, I tried to make 0 assumptions throughout this. So as I was testing the LAB and the SPX bullet velocities, it was clear that they were the same, but I still tested all of them individually, and I did that partially because I didn't want to make any assumptions, like I said, in case there were some differences, and also I just wanted to show you guys the amount of error in my measurements. So we've got like, I don't know, 15 different numbers here that were tested basically twice, and you can see how consistent or inconsistent they were. So like right here, we had 1 frame off. That was 12 meters per second difference in 1 frame. And then this one was 15 meters per second. Again, that was 1 frame. So in general, very repeatable. So it's like 2% different in the actual measurement. Occasionally you see this 1% difference. But anyway, on the SPX and the LAB, we see the same thing we saw with the other snipers. So the Nilsan 90, the FPSKrieger, and the Bruin Agent 90, all 3 give plus 30% bullet velocity. So that's a really big benefit. These are giving more benefit than the suppressors did in Warzone 1. They're actually more than the barrels in a lot of cases, in almost all cases. And again, we see on the barrel's not doing very much. So the 22-inch cavalry barrel only gave 9%. So compared to a suppressor and high velocity ammo, which is pretty much what I've been recommending to people anyway, those tend to be the 2 that are by far the most important. The barrels occasionally do a good amount, but usually they're a little bit less. Onto the Victus. So the Victus, the Bruin counter ops was plus 32%, and then the high velocity plus 48%. So I'm not sure if these are actually different. These came out a little bit different than the other weapons. It could have just been a testing error, you know, a couple frames off here. So this might still be 45%, but we'll have to wait for the data mine numbers from Sim to know exactly. But these should be very accurate, within a couple percent the vast majority of the time. The 26-inch Mammoth barrel actually did 21% bullet velocity plus 21%, so that's pretty significant there. The Bruin L40 Cobra was 21% as well, so there's some pretty good suppressors and barrels for the Victus. So one of the questions I wanted to answer with this, having this data, is can we trust the stat bars? There's obviously no stat bar for bullet velocity, but there is one for range. And if you look at attachments that just affect bullet velocity, you'll see that the range bar is affected by that. So basically what we understand the bars to be at this point is in Modern Warfare 2 and Warzone 2, they are actually tied to real statistics. So I think the bars are basically an algorithm of different stats that they determine affect range. So bullet velocity helps your range because it makes it easier to hit shots at range, things like that. So they are actually tied to real numbers, I think. And the reason I think that is because I went through and picked, based on the bars, what I thought would have the best bullet velocity, and I got every single one of them correct for every attachment slot. So I was never wrong just looking at the stat bars. I didn't even check my data before this. I just went through the stat bars, picked the attachments, and then I swapped and checked, and they were all the same. As I'm going through this, if you guys appreciate all the work I put into this, it's not fun to do this kind of testing. It's just kind of tedious and takes hours and hours. If you appreciate the work I put into this stuff, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, drop a like on the video, and comment as well if you want to help support with the algorithm. I appreciate you watching, but let's get back into this and talk about the max muzzle velocities. All right, and then last up, I wanted to talk about what the max bullet velocities are for each one of these weapons. So basically, I took those percentages and I made the estimations of what the numbers actually were for muzzle velocity, and then I used the data mined muzzle velocity numbers, multiplied them all out, and these are the numbers that I got. So we've got the attachments that are required over on the right, so muzzle, barrel, and ammo. Obviously, it's always high velocity ammo with the fastest bullet velocity barrel and the fastest bullet velocity muzzle. Signal 50 comes out at 1470 meters per second, MCPR 1647, SPX and LAB 1617, and then the Victus at 1840. So again, this is muzzle velocity. These slow down about 15% by 200 meters. And if the bullet's going faster, it'll slow down more than 15% over those 200 meters. Because like I said earlier, the force on that bullet, which I think is supposed to be somewhat realistically modeled, I'm sure it's a simplification, but it's going to have the force put on it by the drag of the air, and that's going to be proportional to the velocity squared. So the more velocity you have, the more penalizing that air resistance is, and percentage wise, the more the bullet's going to slow down. Obviously, I don't know how complex it is, and obviously the coefficient of drag is variable based on the actual velocity of the bullet in real life. So I don't know how detailed it is, but I'm just assuming it's not quite that complex. Maybe it is, I don't know. But yes, the Victus comes out on top at 1840 meters per second. One last thing I wanted to talk about. So in Warzone 1 and Modern Warfare 19, it seemed that they had very realistic, or attempted to have very realistic, like bullet mechanics with air resistance and different calibers and things like that, and how they all interacted for different changes in bullet velocity over time, different amounts of bullet drop, stuff like that. It appears in this game it's either removed and they're all the same, or just dramatically simplified, because I saw between all these different types of ammunition, so 50 cal, 338 Magnum, at 300 Win Mag, these were all within one frame of each other in terms of the bullet velocity after 200 meters of travel. So we have the muzzle velocity from Sim, and then we can see how much it drops over time, and they were all basically identical, even though the bullets were quite a bit different. So it's either really simplified and tuned down compared to what it was in Warzone 1, or it's just been removed entirely and they're all modeled exactly the same. I'm not sure. But basically what that means is if you learn how to if you learn the drop for a certain bullet velocity on one weapon, it's going to transfer to the next weapon, unlike Warzone 19 or Warzone 1, where if you used one of the low bullet drop guns, like I can't even remember the names at this point, but there were like two of those semi-auto weapons, like the Rytec had much lower bullet drop than, say, like an SPR in Warzone 1, even at the same bullet velocity. And that's just because of the way they modeled the bullets and the actual change in bullet velocity and things like that. So I think it's different this time. I think they're gonna be much more similar. So if you memorize how to hit a headshot with an 1100 bullet velocity weapon, I think that will be true for all 1100 bullet velocity weapons. But we'll see. It just appears that way based on the initial data here. All right, that's it for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope you learned something. I will see you in the next one.